small till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't. I'm building up a wall till it breaks. She hated when I call and it's late. I don't wanna keep you waiting. I hope I never keep you waiting. She think I know it all, but I don't.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Mixtape with Scott. I'm the host, Scott Cunningham. I'm a professor of economics at Baylor University. This week's guest is an old friend. I'm going to call him a friend. He can get on YouTube and leave a bunch of bad comments if that's not accurate, but I'm going to call him a friend. This is Ted Joyce, professor of economics and at Baruch College and the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. Ted is a health economist, and I've known him, I guess, since the very beginning of my career. And I don't remember exactly what the story was because whatever the reason is that you often reach out to people when you then get to know them better, then those are the things you remember. So I can't actually remember anymore why it is I reached out to Ted, but I do remember reaching out to him and meeting up with him at a conference, and he was very, very helpful in just talking to me and mentoring me. Ted is a health economist. He works on a lot of topics that I also care about. Mainly, the one that we had in common was abortion policy. He was and is a real leader in the field of economics on that topic, and has worked on a lot of other topics kind of adjacent to those things that have to do with health more generally. Ted was or is a student of Michael Grossman, the health economist that was actually a guest on the podcast a long time ago. And that means that he is Gary Becker's grandson. Michael Grossman was Gary Becker's student, and he was Mike's student. Gary Becker's also my grandfather. One of my advisors was David Mustard, and David Mustard was a Gary Becker student. So that means me and Ted are one of these weird people, which are first cousins twice removed, or actually, I'm never sure exactly what first cousins twice removed is, but I'm going to assume that it means when two people have the same PhD advisor for their grandfather is a version of cousins twice removed. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott and my cousin. Just kidding. He's not my cousin. I'm going to turn it over to Scott and Ted Joyce. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in and for all your support on the podcast. It means a lot to me. And I hope you enjoy this interview. Well, it's a pleasure to have on the show someone that I enlisted 15 years ago and cornered him at a conference and said, I want you to be my mentor. So I don't know if he knew I was doing that when I approached him. This is Ted Joyce. Ted, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Scott. This is fun.
Well, for the sake of the listener, could you tell us your full title? Repeat your name again, your full title, and who pays your paycheck?
Sure. So it's Ted Joyce, professor of economics at Baruch College in the Department of Economics and Finance. I'm also research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research in the Health and Children's Program. The City University and the state of New York pays my bills, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for having been an academic for all these years because it's a terrific gig. People basically pay you to think, write, and talk. What's wrong with that, huh? And so anyway, so it's been a privilege to be a part of the academy and to be able to do work for these many years, working with some great people and having a mentor like Mike Grossman, which was just been invaluable. So that's a short bio. You can keep asking me more, and I'll keep answering more.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's start off with an icebreaker. I want you to think of a vacation that you've had? Doesn't have to be your favorite vacation, doesn't have to be your worst one, doesn't have to be your recent one, doesn't have to be an old one, it's whatever, but it's one that you've noticed recently that you've thought about kind of a couple of times. It just always seems to pop back up in your mind.
It's a good question. I like it. We were in the Dodon in France, in kind of southwestern France, in 2023,
Mm.
and we rented this stone gîte in Salate du Canada, which was the town we were in. And it was physically stunning. I was just kind of blown
Mm.
away. We went in late May, early June, and the weather was 75 and perfect. It hadn't gotten flooded with tourists yet. It
Yeah.
was quiet, so we could, our thing is we like to hike all over the place. We like to go to markets, buy food, come home and cook. And we cooked every night. I grilled outside. I grilled whole fish. It was just a lovely vacation. We had some friends visit. They stayed with us for a few days. It was great to have friends come and kind of break up the 10-day or 2 weeks of vacation. And I just got a part of France, and the way the French live really moved me. I mean, I've been
Mm.
in France before, but I guess as I get, older and closer to retirement, um, the pace was slower. People really valued food, quality of food, cooking, drinking, good wine. It was all a very pleasurable experience for me and my wife. And
Oh, that sounds
uh,
amazing.
yeah, it was. It was probably the best vacation that we've had together. And we've taken a bunch, but this was just chilling away. And I read the postcards that was a big hit in France. It's about modern day Jewry in France and going back to their grandparents that were killed during the Holocaust, and what it
Mm.
means for France to deal with the fact that they basically, gave the Germans 30,000 kids to kill. So it's a
Mm.
stunning story that has really shaken France. And then just to read it while you're in the country and experience the people, all of it, it was just great fun. So anyway.
How'd you pick that place in France? I've never even heard of it. How'd you know of it?
Yeah, well, friends had told us about it, and I work with Guillaume Haringer, who's French. He's a theorist here in our department,
Uh-huh.
and he know the area well. He said, "Oh yes, it's gorgeous. You got to go. It's the place
Mm.
of foie gras. It's just great." And so he gave us some hints and stuff, and off we went, and we found, this amazing housing situation that was just terrific. So
Wow.
can't recommend it enough to everybody. Go to southwestern France in the Dodon, and you can rent bikes. You can do whatever you like. It's great.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna make a note of that. Uh, okay. Well, so let's start when you were little. Tell me about your childhood. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up outside Boston in a suburb called Needham. At the time, it's now become a really high-end suburb, quite coveted by a lot of the professionals in the Boston area. The
Mm.
schools are really great and stuff. When we went there, it was the first industrial park in the United States, and my parents moved out of. I was born in Brighton in Boston, and they moved under the GI Bill out to Needham in like '54, and
Mm.
it was just a kind of a cow pasture with a lot of GI built houses and stuff like that. So,
Oh.
my parents raised 6 kids in about, 1,600 square feet. So by today's standards, that's pretty small. And
Mm.
what's gone on in the town is that when my mother passed at 100, we sold the house, which was the original house,
Yeah.
and they tear it down and they build a 5,000 square foot McMansion on this quarter-acre lot. And you see this kind of bizarre changing of the housing stock in Needham as the professionals move in and,
Yeah.
spend a couple of million to build a house and go to great schools and live close
Yeah.
to Boston. So the suburb has changed a lot. But when I was there, it was pretty. I went to Catholic school, so it was a lot of Irish Catholic, Italian. Um, Families were large. I came from a family of 6. The Dohertys were 11. The Queens were 9. I mean, there were big Irish families in those days. Kind of
Mm.
shockingly to think about, raising 11 kids. The poor mother, that's all I can think about. It's like,
Yeah.
as my granddaughters go through pregnancies, I mean, my daughters go through pregnancies. So anyway, it was a nice suburb, safe, simple, Catholic school. Then I went to the public schools in the 8th grade, and from there, I went to Needham High School and then on to Rutgers for 2 years. And then,
Oh,
yeah,
well, so what did your parents do for a living? Did you say
my
again?
father was a salesman. My mother raised the kids. And then when my brother Jeff, who's at USC, is a professor at USC, when he went to kindergarten, my mother went back to work and worked for the phone company.
Oh,
So, you know, middle class,
right.
again, to support 6 kids on a salary of a salesman. We had 2 cars in the driveway. It's unheard of now to kind of support 6 kids that
Yeah.
way in Needham. It just
Yeah, yeah,
wouldn't be
yeah.
possible.
Right. Right.
So it was a different time.
So what were you when you were little, like if it was like, the summer and school was out, what could I have found you doing in the summer?
Oh, that was, yeah. Since I was 10 years old, I caddied. I'd ride my
Oh,
bike to the golf course across town, and I caddied for 10 years.
huh.
Um, Kind of made a bunch of money caddying, got very independent because I was able to caddy. Picked up golf, played high school golf. Yeah, that's what caddies did. I mean, on Monday it was caddy day, and so we would get there at 6 in the morning and try to do 72 holes in one day. I mean, we
What's the
played.
skill set? What's the marginal product of a caddy? What do you need to have?
Well, it's good if you get into the game, and what happens is that the good golfers at the club who gamble want the
Mhm.
caddies who can help them in their gambling. So
Oh,
it was important for me to be able to say, I think it's a 6 iron. The wind is blowing here. You hit that about 170. I think that's the club to hit. So it becomes a skilled profession in the sense if you know the sport, and
yeah.
then you become valuable to those kinds of uh, you know. Force so to speak. And then, I caddied for the professional, and we went to state tournaments at times. And so
Mm.
that was a whole other part of the culture. It was
Were you a
great.
big golfer? Were you a big golfer in high school?
I played, in high school golf. I was in the team. We went to the state championships. I was in the state tournaments. So yeah. And then I went to college, and I didn't pick up a club literally for 40 years. I didn't
40.
touch 40 years. And then when I turned 60, I picked up a club, and I go, the kids are gone. They're out of the house. I got some free time, and I'm like totally addicted now. And
Ah,
there's a whole group of economists who I know Levitt and the Chicago gang. They apparently play like intensely. So I heard Fama plays almost every day or something like that.
you gonna go caddy for them when they're
No,
getting
I don't
done?
want to caddy. I want to play with them. That's what I want to do.
Okay.
Yeah, no more caddying. I've caddied for Levitt enough in other ways.
That's right. That's right. I'm gonna ask about that. Well, what did you want to be when you grew up then? When you were in high school?
It's a good question. I just didn't really know. I went to school as an undergrad. I majored in bilingual education,
Mm,
Spanish being the language, and I didn't take an economics course until after I'd graduated, and then I started going back to school at night, taking economics courses, got into it,
yeah.
and that was so. I really had little exposures in undergrad to economics. It was mostly, you know, political science or
Mhm.
education, or I took some statistics and math, which I liked, but that was about it.
What about in high school? What did your teachers, if I could have like eavesdropped in the teachers lounge and they're talking about young Ted Joyce as a 12th grader about to graduate, what do you think they would have what's the range of opinions if you had to guess of what people the kind of kid they saw you as?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not quite sure. I wasn't a stellar student. I was in the top 10% of our class, which, high schools were big then. We had almost 700 kids in my senior class. So,
Yeah.
uh, but I didn't stand out in that way. I played in the golf team and stuff like that, but I wasn't active politically. I mean, it was during the Vietnam War, so I was active in that sense, but I wasn't active in high school politics or running for any kind of class office and stuff like that. So I
Mm,
think they would have seen me as fairly unremarkable,
mm,
and not quite sure where I was going, and
mm.
that's a probably pretty accurate read of what was
Wait,
going
so
on.
when are you in high school? What is that? Late
I
60s?
graduated in 72. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I go back a ways.
So it was real fresh. The Vietnam War was happening. What was happening at Needle High School? Was there a lot of intense political debates and things like that?
Not certainly among a segment there was, and there were strikes and bomb scares and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You figure 68, 69, 70, 71, it was pretty hot times. And so, yes, they were part of the scene. We were a suburb. Boston was really hot. The colleges were really going. And my sister was ahead of me, and she was at BU, and my brother had gone to Boston College. And those are pretty intense times. And so, actually, I got my draft number was 53 in the lottery. So I was really at risk of being drafted. And so
What's the cutoff?
The cutoff my year was 125. But my brother had said, before you get to your number, you should apply conscientious objector. So I did. And what happened is I go to school at Rutgers. I go to New Jersey. I get called to the draft board. I'm supposed to report. Strategically, you're told to delay it. So I delay it. And because I had an application in for a conscientious objector, I had to have a hearing. That delayed it further. And then in 73, the draft ended and I was spared. So
wait, so 53 was a draft number?
Oh, yeah. I went up to 125 my year.
Oh, I thought you meant it was over 125. So you were in it.
No. 0 to 125 went if you were above, And so I'll never forget the senior high school when they're reading the numbers out of the, the bin and stuff, and you sit there and you're listening and you just hope and then your birthday comes up and you go, oh, Jesus, what do I do now?
You must have felt sick.
That was not a good feeling. Absolutely. I was quite scared and, but had an older brother who kind of, had gone through, the draft as well. And so he was actually earlier than the draft. So he had a college deferment. They didn't, because of the lottery, they got rid of the deferments, as Angus has obviously shown. And, so the lottery, it mattered, and it mattered to me, and I was just lucky to have delayed it, and then Nixon ended it, so it was good.
Well, so did you have any favorite classes? College? Well, what kind of stuff did you really? So you said you go to Rutgers, but your Vita says UMass Amherst?
Yes, I transferred after from Rutgers to UMass to biology education. I studied in Spain for a semester. It was pretty nice. I was also paying college for myself. So the out-of-state tuition started to bang at Rutgers. And so I went back to UMass and in-state tuition, and I was able to finance that by myself. And but I pursued education at Rutgers. I started to, and I continued at Massachusetts. And favorite class?
Thought you were going to be a teacher?
I thought I was going to be a teacher. Yeah. And I did. I taught after I graduated from UMass, I taught for 3 years in a CETA, Comprehensive Employment and Training Act under Carter. It was a manpower program. I taught English as a second language to adults. And it was just a time in which I think you just weren't as career focused as I know my daughters were, and I know kids are today. And you could spend a couple of years, 3 years, whatever, doing a job like I did, living in Boston, taking courses at Harvard Extension. I had a great time. I had a girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. I felt like I was actually living as an adult. And then when the time started, after a couple of, 3 years, I said, okay, this is not a long-term career that I really want to pursue. So that's when I started to consider grad school.
Oh, okay. Okay, wait. So what year are we at? So you graduated, you're living, where are you doing that?
I graduated in 76. I'm living in Brookline, Mass, and around Boston.
Oh, you're back in, so you stayed in Massachusetts.
I stayed in Massachusetts. I taught in the manpower program in Lynn, Massachusetts. And then in 79, I go back to graduate school. And I started.
So what happened? How do you find this econ? That doesn't sound like it would have been on your radar.
It's a good question. I was, politically pretty engaged and was reading politically, and kind of discovered that economics seemed to be a discipline that had some insight into how the world worked. And I was pretty curious about that. And so, you get a little shock when you start taking macro, micro, and you go, wait a minute, I think I was more interested in political economy here, And But anyway, but I pursued it and took some more stat courses, and that kind of got me
So you were
going. I
taking
like
you were taking like night school courses to
exactly.
get up to kind of tech up. Were you trying to get all your math classes and stuff, or what were you trying to
I
get?
was just trying to get basic econ so I could apply to a master's program in econ with some credibility and enough,
Mm,
statistics classes that they knew I could handle basic statistics and stuff like that.
yeah.
So yeah, no, and then so
So
graduate
your
school
plan
was
was to go to get a master's.
yes, it was just to get a master's and then see what I could
Oh,
do with a master's, and then you realize, well, that's pretty useless. There's not many places you can go with a
yeah.
master's.
Right.
Uh, so then I met Mike Grossman in New York, and he invited me to come to the grad center and consider it. So I transferred from NYU to the grad
Oh,
center
you had been in the master's program at
at
NYU?
NYU. Yes, 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 yes.
Oh,
And Mike was very supportive, and got me financial aid, and
how'd
uh,
you meet him?
it was funny. In New York there are various seminars, and there are word of mouth about programs and stuff. And I wasn't happy at NYU. I was considering a PhD, and not quite sure I wanted to go to NYU for a PhD, or I was even capable of it. And so I
Mm,
was looking around. I was seeing someone who was in living in New York, so I wasn't going to leave New York at that time. And so I went to the grad center. I told Mike I was interested in exploring the program, and he kind of took me, sent me, showed me around, et cetera, the courses, what I would need to do, et cetera, et cetera. He also said that, he's looking for research assistants at the MBER. So that was the other
mm,
fantastic part of it. So
mm.
I went to the grad center and started working as research assistant at the MBER. And that's when I really started to get into
What were you doing
empirical
at the
work.
NBR? What did he have you doing?
Oh, Mike was early on in grants and gathering grants and
Oh,
looking at infant mortality. Actually, was what Mike was
yeah.
doing, and he
Uh-huh.
published this work in 1970 with Steve Jacobitz, and on the determinants of infant mortality. And one of
Uh-huh.
the variables he had in there was the abortion rate, and
Oh.
so my dissertation was to apply the Heckman selection procedure to um, birth outcomes, arguing that births were a selected sample of the universe of pregnancies, and abortion was a selection mechanism, and therefore births were a non-random draw of pregnancies that could be selected in certain ways.
Oh,
And
interesting.
Heckman's, the Heck had just come out in '79 and stuff, and so we were the computers were pretty rudimentary. You would run that Hackett or by the model, the selection model. You have to put it on and go home for the weekend. It took a whole weekend to run that thing. Do the maximum likelihood, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
those were old days, but it got done. And
This is with the punch cards. These are these IBM
I
mainframes.
started punch cards, but then we went. I was with I did my dissertation in on a PC. We
Uh-huh.
had the floppy 5 1/4 discs
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
could hold maybe, I don't know,
Yeah, it wasn't much. I can't
it
remember
wasn't
either.
much. It was like just kilobytes. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
uh, you had to put a number of floppies in to keep things going and stuff. It
yeah,
was pretty rudimentary, but
yeah.
we got it done, and I got out.
Well, wait,
And
what year was it when you graduate?
85.
Oh, 85. Okay. Okay. So you're what was your reaction when Grossman introduces you to Gary Becker's stuff? I'm assuming that's where it happened, right?
Totally, totally,
Yeah.
totally.
What was
Uh,
it? What did you think when you were reading that? Because that had to have been not like the kind of stuff you were reading that got you into econ, and probably wasn't a lot like those micro and macro classes. What struck you about reading Gary Becker that first time?
I guess it was the whole human capital approach, thinking about the production function, and
Mm,
then running into Mike's application, his seminal work on health as a production process, and that
yeah.
medical care may be not the most consequential or important input into the production of health.
Mm,
And that insight made great sense. the time aspects of human capital investments, et cetera, those made great sense to me. So it was compelling that you could have that there was a framework to look at, let's say, prenatal care as an input into the production of infant mortality or infant health, right? And that prenatal care is a function of the price of care, but also the time cost of accessing it, et cetera, et cetera. So Becker's stuff made a lot of sense. It did, especially in that domain. And Mike was clearly a star pupil, and his health model was still standing. What can you say? So and to take it with Mike, take his class in health economics was just was terrific. So
I bet. Was he as towering? This is probably just my. To me, he's like a towering figure in health. And so was it clear? Was that the case back then? That was like early 80s. Was it somebody that you were like, yeah, Mike's like a very respected person within this field of health economics? Or was it or was it more that, you were just kind of watching Mike over a long stretch of time becoming more and more well known?
Well, he worked with Fuchs. Fuchs was the father, perhaps, of of modern health economics. We can argue that one, but clearly Fuchs was a giant and very influential in Mike as well as Becker. And the combination was actually a rich one. Becker was clearly the theorist, and Fuchs had a really practical mind and could see relationships that were really important. And so to be around Mike was to be around both Fuchs and Becker. And then, Mike's cohort is Newhouse and Phelps, and it's quite a cohort, right? And so you were exposed to all of those. Well, I think the star pupil from the grad center is Ken Wolpen, and Ken
went to the grad center.
Yeah, and so he was, one of the stars, and he was. I remember when his and Rosenzweig article came out in JPE on, infant mortality and the two-stage least squares and the production function approach, et cetera. It was very stimulating to all of us. And Rosenzweig came to the grad center and gave a talk and blah, blah, blah. So you felt like you were part of a growing and burgeoning kind of subfield of economics. And Mike was clearly one of the movers in that field. So you felt that he was connected and growing, and his reputation just got better and better.
What kind of advisor was he for your dissertation? He was your main advisor, right?
Yeah, there's kind of like no one like him in the sense of the generosity. I think I got 13 pages of comments on my dissertation, and like rapidly, and you're like, whoa. He was amazingly attentive to his students and helped you find work. And we used to call him a one-man welfare state because he actually got people work. He did immigration. He did marriage. He got people married. I mean, he was just kind of remarkable in his support of the universe of students that came out of there. And he kind of built the health economics program at the MBER, and a lot of us rode his coattails into it. So that we were lucky to have him get us in.
Yeah. Every time I hear these stories about the kind of advisor and professor he was, I just think I got to up my game and, be half as good than of him. And maybe I'll not feel so bad. He's just it's so impressive.
It's so impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to watch him at the Bureau, even when he's director of the health economics program. He would write the most detailed reports to Feldstein or Perturba, and I'm sure they both appreciated his attention to detail, his thoroughness, and his just conscientiousness. He was just so he's unique in that sense, and don't feel bad. None of us are going to get close to what he does with his students. So
well, it's good to have his example. So you what do you write your job market paper on? You're writing it on is it like the effect of abortion on the birth rate, or you said it's a selection mechanism. Can you explain it to me again?
Sure. So, in other words, let's say let's say that you think that prenatal care is endogenous to,
Yeah.
that people choose prenatal care. Okay, so
Mhm.
how do they kind of select into prenatal care? And so we were using pregnancy resolution, or I was using pregnancy resolution, abort, not abort, as an indicator of wantedness in essence. Okay, and that
Mhm.
women who didn't abort clearly wanted the pregnancy more than those who did abort, and because of that, they were more likely to initiate prenatal care earlier, and therefore the if you controlled for lambda in the selection in the birth outcome
Yeah.
model with prenatal care and lambda on the right hand side, you could get, quote, an unbiased estimate of the effect of prenatal care on birth outcomes. Right? It's
Mm.
it was totally unidentified.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah.
It was ridiculously identified. Right? Totally ad
Right.
hoc, and wouldn't get published in anywhere today. But at the
Mm.
time, it was an application of this new way of thinking about censored regressions and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So
Right.
it seemed like a nice application, and I published. Mike and I got one in the JPE on it, and then Mike and I got one in demography when we
Yeah.
specifically looked at wantedness and argued this was a kind of way to get at wantedness, a revealed preference approach. Right? In other
Yeah.
words, I'm not terminating. We used New York City data, which was pretty reasonable because it had induced termination certificates there at the individual level, and you could
Uh,
concatenate births and induced terminations because they had the same characteristics: age, race, marital status, blah blah blah. And so you could use those on the right hand side to predict who was going to terminate and who wasn't. It
uh,
wasn't a great predicting equation, but it 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 passed at given the time it passed.
sure. No,
And
I
so
get it. I get
yeah.
it. I totally get it. Okay. So you have you graduate, you go to Iowa first. So tell me about being on the
No,
market.
no, I go
Oh,
to
you don't?
Iona.
Oh, it's not
Iona.
Iowa?
No, Iona is a Catholic college. It's like St. John's, Fordham. It's in that
Oh,
network. It's right here outside New York City. So I went there
oh,
for
Iona. Yeah.
Iona.
Okay. I
Yes,
misread it.
a little basketball power, and I went to Iona, and a good Catholic school where they really paid attention to students in the sense of like they were on top. Every attrit was worth a new admit. In other words, if you could cut down on your attrition, you didn't have to, have such a high. You could basically preserve your admittances. And so these Catholic schools were really attentive because they were competing in many ways with the City University of New York, which was cheaper, but more
Mm.
dispersed, less attention, kind of wide open. And St. John's, Fordham, Iona offered this much more curated and protected kind of education. And
Oh.
it didn't cost as much as NYU or, Columbia or any of the more private Vassar or something like that. And so the Catholic kids in New York City could get a good college education at half the cost, much like
Mm.
the public schools versus the Catholic schools versus public schools versus private schools.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was at the higher ed level. They filled that
Mm.
niche and did it pretty well. But I was there for a
Mm.
year, and then a position opened at Baruch, and I went to Baruch, and then started teaching at the grad center and Baruch, and so that's where my home
I
has
don't
been.
really understand this like network of like Baruch and Hunter and and the Graduate
Yeah,
Center and the
yeah.
CUNY. Like, so you're what? You're at Baruch, but somehow you're connected to the grad center too?
Well, I'm at Baruch. My tenure's at Baruch, but I'm on the faculty of the grad center, and the model is that the grad center has relatively few what's called central appointments, people whose tenure is directly at the grad center. Economics, I think, had maybe 4 central appointments, which was terrible. And what they did was they wanted faculty from the campuses, like Partha Deb or myself, from Hunter, or from Queens, to go and to teach a graduate course and supervise some students. And that kind of hub and spoke model was what they had in mind, right?
Mm.
And it just doesn't work well because
Mm.
my dean and my provost don't really get much when I go to the grad center and teach. Okay. They lose a full-time faculty. There's some money, some revenue sharing that goes on at the central administration. The dean will tell you he never sees a penny or she never sees a penny of it. And so when I go to the grad center, the dean thinks it's a net loss. And so your incentives are such that you really want to focus on your home campus. But intellectually, you're only going to teach PhD classes at the grad center.
Right.
So I taught applied econometrics there, and it was great for me because, I was 2 steps ahead of the students and had to learn this stuff for myself,
Yeah.
as you obviously have done. And
When was that?
So I started in 92 teaching econometrics at the grad center, and then I stopped for a few years, and then I team taught it with Partha Deb, and then I team taught it with David Yeager, and we, it was a fun course to teach. We basically, did a kind of mostly harmless econometrics, and then when the book came out, we said, "Wow, this is great! We now have a book," and it was just fun to teach IV and D&Ds and RDs, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it was a great place to teach. And then, I worked with, David Yeager, and he was great to teach with, and we would co-teach the course, and it was all really, it all worked well. And then I got to supervise students because of it, because they liked our class. It was very applied. And so students were gravitated to faculty who were doing applied work, whose classes they liked. And so David had a whole bunch of students and I had a bunch of students. And so that worked out well for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So you did, in my mind, this credibility revolution stuff is like so distinctly a paradigm and like very, very, saliently different than econometrics in general. But I never can tell if I'm like unique and feeling that way. Did you get a sense that like the kinds of stuff that you could see tracing back to like, Jaeger's like interacting with like Angerson Kruger. So, was there a sense of like, well, this kind of applied econometrics sort of feels a little different than what I was doing, or is it just all seamless, just kind of a part of just like you didn't really see it that way?
Oh, no, I totally agree with you in the sense, it made more sense. It was more maybe accessible, and maybe this makes someone like Heckman think it's like not very good if it's too accessible in many ways. But it had an intuition because it was focusing on design as opposed to kind of like pure econometrics. And so, I had done the sample selection stuff, and it would never pass muster, and it shouldn't pass muster, given it was completely it's unidentified. In other words, I didn't have anything I could, put in the pregnancy resolution equation that I could leave out of the birth weight equation. There was no identifying variation there at all.
Parametric thing, right? You were doing.
It was totally parametric, exactly. And so, or you just made up some exclusion restrictions, So the article we always taught in the first week of class was Lalonde's 1986.
Yeah.
That's a classic, and that just kind of, so that's 86. And so 86. It's setting the stage saying, look, folks, the pyrotechnics of econometrics are not giving us very consistent answers here. Let's think about what we're doing. And so I think that's a seminal piece, and it's an eye opener for all the students.
It was an eye opener for you too.
Oh yeah, totally.
Because you sort of already were kind of feeling like that same level of frustration even before you read it. When did you read it? You read it at the grad center when you were in grad school?
No, I didn't. I didn't read it later. I read it later when I started to teach the class. And so that's like 92, 93, and so that's when I started to really appreciate that. Because in Lalonde, he does Heckman selection as one of the specifications, right? And it doesn't work, and you can't really identify it in any kind of credible way. And he's honest about it. And so that, I had been in that model. I knew that model, and so I'm going, yeah, I agree. It just, I could make a lot of things happen with monkeying around with what I tried to leave out, et cetera, et cetera. So it was very sobering. And it set me down on the path to like, okay, pay more attention to design and credible exogenous variation. That's kind
Mhm.
of what's
When did you
driving.
feel like your research started to take on a different flavor that starts to be a little bit more design? Is there like, if I look at your Vita, is there like a certain time where you're like, oh yeah, it's starting to shift a little bit?
Yeah, I think it was the Journal of Health Economics. Bob Kester and I did a thing on parental notification laws,
Yeah,
and we did one of the early diff and diffs on it,
dip
and
and
then
diff. Yeah.
we did a triple D and D,
Mhm.
and I remember presenting it in front of Gruber
That
and
was
the
after
gang.
Gruber, right? So Gruber's
Yes,
triple diff is 94.
I presented this in '95 at the MBER Summer Institute,
Oh,
and Stager's in the audience, and Gruber and Ed Norton, and
yeah.
it's a young cohort and that I think really kind of set me on that path.
Yeah.
Um, so that's it's mid '90s, and that's when I think started to do more credible research
Right.
that I was comfortable with,
Yeah.
um,
Right.
as opposed to feeling sometimes, in the early days, oh boy, if someone knows, someone asked me this question, whole thing could collapse here,
Yeah. 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 That's a
that kind of
very frustrating feeling.
totally. It's much better to
Yeah.
go up and say, look, here's what I did. It worked or
Here's
it
what I
didn't.
did. Yep.
These are the results, and I don't want to oversell it or try not to oversell it. So
Hmm.
let's go at it, and help me with this. So
Yeah.
anyway, that
Totally.
became a much
Totally.
more comfortable way to kind of do work and present it.
Well, so what made you, it's interesting. One of the things about you, Ted, that's different. I don't know, I actually think it's not as obvious that we're different in this sense because I worked on sex work forever, but you've always like been very committed to these reproductive health topics, like we're going on 30, 40 years or something where you've made such a deep contribution to that area in general, maternal health and then reproductive health. What is it about you that sort of sticks with these topics like that? Why
So
that one in particular too?
it's a good question. I think that new events take you back to the question, can I look at the question differently? So there's Roe v. Wade, there's abortion and crime, there is, I got data from New York State on the early history of abortion in New York. And maybe you're familiar with it, but it was a remarkable piece of data in the sense it had all the terminations that were done in New York State,
Oh yeah, I remember this paper.
and they
Yeah.
have the state from which the woman came from, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
in 71 and 72, prior to Roe, there's this flow into New York that's nothing short of staggering. I mean, we
Yeah.
had 3,000 teenagers from Florida had their abortion in New York in 71, 72. Okay.
Mm.
The abortion, I published this in the New England Journal of Medicine. The abortion rate in Michigan, for example, was like 5.6 per thousand in 1971. That's 5.6 per thousand women who terminated in New York divided by the number of residents in Michigan. The Michigan abortion rate now
Oh.
must be maybe 13 or 14. In other words, it's almost half the size of the current abortion rate, but this is only women from Michigan who terminated in New York. All right. And there were those kinds of flows. And
Because
so,
there's only 5 states that could do it, right? It would be DC, Alaska, California, New York, and Hawaii. Those were the
yeah,
early repeal
yeah.
states.
Take out Hawaii. That's way too
Yeah.
far. No one's flying.
Yeah.
Alaska's too far.
Alaska's too
All
far.
right. Washington has
And even California is too far.
Yeah, Washington State has a residency requirement, right? So if you can eliminate that one, that's got to be you got to be a
Oh,
resident for a year or 9 months or
yeah.
something. So
Yeah.
the big one on the East Coast, people don't appreciate it. And Donnie and Levitt, we got that went back. Washington D.C. was a big place. We published the data. There were 20,000 terminations going on in D.C. in 71, 72, and DC and New York were like the East Coast hubs, and then California was the West Coast hub.
Yeah.
And in that, my whole thing about abortion and crime, we'll get to it, I guess, eventually, but it was that
Yeah.
is that they assumed that the abortion rates were zero in the non-early legalizers, and they weren't zero. There were
Yeah.
these huge flows of residents coming to New York, right?
You
And
mean
so
assume as in coded as a zero too, right?
Coded as zero.
As the abortion
Yes.
ratio is coded as a zero. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Which just wasn't true. And so you've got this mismeasurement going on kind of immediately, and so,
You've been working. So by the time that paper, so it's probably, is it 99? I can't even remember. Is it 01 or 99?
so Donnie Levitt's come out in '01. All right.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, it's Stager, Levine, and Gruber is that 01 or is that 99?
No, that is 99.
That's
And
99.
yes, and that's yes, that's the Roe v. Wade one in '99, and
Yeah.
and then Donnie and Levitt, Abortion and Crime in 2001.
Yeah.
And that's.
But you'd been working on this since 87. Abortion in general.
Yes.
Abortion
yes,
and
yes.
crime. That's what's kind of interesting in your
not
Vita.
crime,
You've got,
not crime. Yeah, not crime. I didn't.
well,
Well,
you've
yes,
got
yes,
the
I yes,
papers
I,
on
yes,
crack.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes,
And
yes,
deterrence and
yes,
stuff like that.
yes.
You've
No,
got
you're
these
right.
twin kind of things, and they're not really connected to each other. But it's ironic that this abortion crime link paper comes about because in some ways it would be really natural that you would have opinions about that because you had a lot of experience studying both of them, just not this interaction idea.
Yes. No, you're
Yeah.
spot on in the sense of
Yeah.
like, I go, whoa, I kind of, I dabbled in crime, but I kind of know abortion. And then the conclusion that abortion is responsible for 50% of the decrease in this historic downturn in crime, going, wow, there's nothing in my experience that would suggest that's going on,
It's
So-
not a very design kind of styled paper at all.
No,
it's like panel regressions with a constructed. It's modeling the outcome, as you would say. Like you're
yes,
regressing crime onto hopefully exogenous, distant abortion ratios. And so, anyway, where did you first see it? When's the first time you saw it?
it's a good question. It was
An NBR?
No, it was in the newspaper. It was an NBR working paper,
Yeah.
and it got a huge splash. And
Is this that New York Times piece by Dubner?
That's the magazine interview he does with Levitt, and that's where he kind of gets, he and Levitt get connected and stuff.
Yeah.
But no, it's a headline article in I don't know, the Post, Washington Post, New York Times. It's a big deal that these researchers have said that, again, you took some of the most volatile political issues in the country, right? Abortion and crime, you put them together, boom. I mean, you can only imagine the explosion. And the original paper is really quite crude. The working paper is, and they get better, on the QJE. But still, I would contest it, and still do to this day. Actually,
what was your reaction to the Gruber, Levine, and Stager paper? Because in a lot of ways, that Gruber, Levine, and Stager paper sort of is everything except for crime in a lot of ways. Because it's like, the abortion causing the marginal child. So, like, what was your reaction to that one?
So it was a hard to kind of at first I was like, wow, these guys have scooped everybody. This is a nice application. They're exploiting a really, dramatic kind of change. And, they actually only use a 5% decrease in birth rates, right? In other words, because they are looking at changes in births in the neighboring states, which are also experiencing substantial declines. I mean, we published in the Journal of Health Economics, the decline was national. It happens in 1970. It's amazing. By the time you get to 73, there's not much decrease in births. At 73, 74, there's nothing going on. And so I didn't quite buy the bounce back so much. Also, the magnitudes are not that large. I mean, in terms of percentage point changes in low birth rate, they're significant. But I think John once quipped that, wow, if he had to cluster his standard errors, a lot of his stuff may not have been significant, Yeah. And so that was before the clustering revolution. And a lot of stuff comes off as significant that may not be, because the impact on the coefficients were not real large. And, and then if you go to Levine and Stager's Anonot's piece in RE Stat later on, half their outcomes aren't even significant. And so it just abortion's not that big of a selection mechanism in my mind. It
Mm.
just isn't. And so,
So what happens? That paper comes out, abortion crime, abortion crime comes out 2001. When do you, so what's going on? It's like you're just ruminating a little bit over this. You're just like you've got some itch that you can't scratch fully because you're just finding it to be difficult to buy. And I mean, it's in your face all the time by the time the book comes out.
it is totally an itch, and and they were great. They shared their data and their
Yeah.
programs so you could replicate things. And that's when you start to, really dip into it. And, Chris Foote is the one. I remember I was on a Sunday morning, and he emails me and says, "Did you see they don't have state year fixed effects in there?" And they say they do, And so it became this little community of like skeptics. John Lott was also a skeptic, but John and Levitt had this whole other history that complicated it. And I didn't think Lott's approach was very, very. He actually has a line in which he says he's run 6,000 regressions. I'm going, really? To admit to such data mining is not really cool, And so anyway, but it was engaging for me because I got to play in the big leagues, and I'm not a big league player per se. And so it was really pretty impressive to be in there. I got invited to debate Levitt at Rochester, and that was an experience and a half, and
Why? What happens at that debate? He seems like he's got kind of a low ego, doesn't really get offended or anything. He doesn't have, he always struck me as not being as invested in these results as I would have thought. But is that inaccurate?
Well, he's extremely gracious. I arrive in Rochester. He was just gracious. He said, "Oh, I saw the New England Journal, blah, blah." He's just very praiseworthy and says nice things. And, so he's a little understated at some level. And then we got to lunch, which was amazing, with the faculty, right? He and I with the faculty, and they're all Rochester faculty. And at this time, Levitt's an editor of the JPE, right? So you can imagine the entire room wants to get their articles in the JPE, and here's the editor. We go to lunch, and Levitt starts telling these stories because Freakonomics, he's working on Freakonomics with Dubner, and he's got these amazing stories. And the room is like howling. They're laughing, they're having a great time. And I'm going to myself, oh boy, this is not going to go well. This guy is not only charming, but he's clever, and he's gracious, and he's telling great stories. And so the debate format was pretty intense, right? He went 30 minutes, I went 30 minutes. He went 30 minutes questions. I go 30 minutes questions. He goes 30 minutes. It was like 2.5 hours of like up and there.
Had you ever done something like that before?
Never at that level
How'd you
either.
even prepare for that?
I just figured, I was actually fairly confident that my figures and diagrams, that basically it's regression to the mean is what he's got here, And if you look at the right cohorts, in other words, if you take a 19-year-old in New York who was unexposed to legalized abortion, and then you take the 17-year-old who was exposed, both of them, like in 1992, one's exposed, one's unexposed, one should see a dip because the birth is more wanted. The other, there's nothing there. In other words, if you looked at cohort period effects, there are period effects going on, which was the crack epidemic. There was no cohort effect going on, and the graphs kind of showed it, And I wasn't the first there. The criminologists were there. Phil Cook was there. Alan Blumstein was there. They kind of noted that the rise in crime was incredible. I mean, the black teen homicide rate was up to 300 per 100,000. I mean, that's World War II kind of like, death rates. So it's a staggering rise, and goes up and it goes down. I mean, so there was some shock, which is a classic regression to the mean, pushing this period effect up. The shock goes away, the effect comes down, and you've got regression to the mean in essence, I mean, that's how I viewed it. And so I thought the figures could show it. But the point was, during the debate, what was funny was that they asked the most softball questions to Steve. I mean, like softball questions. And for me, they were like throwing knives. Like, who's this punk from Baruch, who's like taking on Mr. Chicago here, boy, this kid's got balls. And so, and I just felt like they were just throwing knives at me, but it was a great
Do you like
experience.
it? Did you kind of feel like you were in your happy place?
Well, I wasn't terrified because I thought I had figures and regressions that could make my case, right?
Mm.
And I said, go ahead, let's fire away. I think I'm going to show you this, and this is what I think is going on here. Um, and so I walked away feeling like, okay, I held my own, and
Yeah.
uh, in a hostile audience, so to speak. And then we went out to dinner, and again, Steve was so gracious. But in
Yeah.
print, he's less gracious. In print, it's more like, okay, I'm defending my turf here,
Right.
and
Right.
there's that old Saturday Night Live gig when point counterpoint when Nicholas Van Hoffman goes, Shayna, you ignorant slut, and
Yeah.
I and I almost felt like in print, Leverett was saying, Ted, you ignorant, anyway, but in person, he's totally gracious and
Yeah. Yeah.
and very nice to be around.
Phil Cook once said to me though that Levitt had been really good for the field of crime. And did you feel
Oh yeah.
like that it had just kind of you could feel like it had elevated the field what that were sort of in, even abortion maybe?
Yeah, no question. I think for crime, he was like huge. I mean, he gets to
Yeah.
John Bates Clark, I think, because of his work in crime.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I think he and NBR starts to have a series, or
Yeah.
workshops on crime. He's totally influential on that. Absolutely.
Did you feel that at the time though, that all of a sudden you were sort of that things around you at that period of time, the kinds of topics you were working on were being taken were being read by people that maybe had not been reading it before, even on topics like abortion? I mean,
Yes, Phil Cook did
oh,
work on abortion. I mean, so yes, and he invited me down to Duke to present, and yes, so it catapulted me into kind of an arena that I hadn't been in, and that was terrific. I didn't come at it from a crime perspective, really, and no one really thought of me as a criminologist. Although I did, I Jens Ludwig had me go down at the criminology meetings and present with Levitt. In Atlanta. And that was also fantastic in the sense of, like, again, getting exposure in venues I wouldn't normally get exposure to. So,
yeah,
but I
sure.
wasn't a criminologist per se. I was
Hmm.
really more of a kind of reproductive person, health person. And so that was my angle to it. And, I've kind of stayed there.
I want to read something to you, and I wanted to get your response to this. This is by William Shockley. He's a physicist that worked in Bell Labs and won the Nobel Prize for his work on the transistor. And this is a quote from an article he wrote. It's always kind of fascinated me. I'm going to just read it. He says, consider the factors that may be involved in publishing a scientific paper. Hold on, Alexis. Okay. Scientific paper. He says, consider the factors that might be involved in publishing a scientific paper. Partial listing, not in order of importance, might be a partial listing of those factors, not in order of importance, might be number one, the ability to think of a good problem. Number two, the ability to work on it. Number three, the ability to recognize a worthwhile result. Number four, the ability to make a decision as to when to stop and write up the results. Number five, the ability to write adequately. Number six, ability to profit from criticism. Number seven, the determination to submit the paper to a journal. Number eight, the persistence in making changes if the journal requires it. So he says these things and he kind of like presents them as inputs in the production of a paper.
Mm-hmm.
But he lays down a production function. He doesn't really call it this, but it's a Cobb-Douglas production function
Mm-hmm.
where all of those inputs are just multiplied by each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's interesting because if it's Cobb-Douglas, then you have to have at least a non-zero value of all eight of them.
Right.
If it was
Right.
linear,
Yeah.
you could have great idea. You could have everything and not have the persistence to make changes, and you'd still get a paper published. But because of this, so I was wondering, I guess the first thing when you hear something like that, because I'll just tell you up front, when I look at your Vita and from knowing you these years, I've always thought, well, Ted has, I didn't know this, but I would have said now Ted has all eight of these inputs. You can see it in his productivity. He's got this production function that he's able to write scientific manuscripts, really good scientific manuscripts consistently. So I was kind of curious when you hear me read that, how does that resonate with you with your own experience if you look over your career as being this, in my opinion, a productive researcher in academia?
Yeah. I mean, my CV, I'm proud of it. It's, again, and it's basically I've just stayed at it in a steady pace, and when I look at junior people or otherwise, you have to know how to be a closer, so to speak. In other words,
Yeah.
you're reading all 8, 9 of those, you realize that people can get discouraged at a number of those junctures, and you can't get discouraged. You just have to kind
Yeah.
of like take the shots. You know this as well as I do. I mean, you must have pursued it with prostitution. It's a hard thing to get into journals like that, but you stayed at it. You made your case. You pursued it, and it eventually stuck. And that's really I think what makes successful academics is that those kinds of persistence. I mean, that's what it comes down to. You just have to get up, do it again, listen, revise, be able to hear criticisms. Don't get too discouraged. Don't get too beat up by it, and keep going and like the process. I mean, when
Mm,
I think about giving tenure, when we vote on tenure, I'm more concerned about, does the person like the endeavor? Do they like these characteristics? Do they have those traits? They may not be a superstar, but they're in this for the long run because they like teaching, they like doing research, they like learning. To me, that's more important than a young star who may burn out, and stop publishing by 40, and now you're stuck with a person like that.
yeah.
So I think that's a very good quote, Scott, and I think would characterize both of us.
Do you think that's in your personality? Like you've always had that level of resilience and, hyper focus, or is that like something you had to learn over your career?
Probably some of both.
Uh-huh.
Another maybe a little insecurity, a chip on your shoulder to prove yourself. That
Yeah.
kind of energizes you, and you learn to get up. And from a big family in the middle of the kid, you kind of
Mm,
neglected at some level, and so you learn to kind of like uh, you're going to eat what you kill, so to speak, and so
yeah.
you're going to have to kind of make it on your own. And so I don't know. That's part of it. I can't really attribute it to it too much to it, but you can see it in certain young researchers versus others, and sometimes it's hard to make that discernment, but that's what I try and do.
Yeah. The closer, the starter, the middle parts, and the closer. So I'm curious, um, is there a particular thing that in your career, a particular factor that got mentioned that you think tends to get overlooked that actually is really, really important that you don't really learn in school, or that's even the more difficult one to cultivate? I mean, if you had to just sort of even notice, I mean, everybody that's an economist is very smart. It's like selects on smart people. So it's interesting. I mean, none of the things that Shockley said was be smart,
Yeah, yeah.
all like they were non-cognitive ability elements. And so I'm curious, what do you think people don't take as seriously that you had to learn maybe the hard way was really, really important?
So it's a great question, and I didn't go to a top 25 graduate school, and so I sometimes worry, or think that I had to catch up in my training and kind of background and stuff like that relative in a technical sense. But I always felt pretty confident in recognizing, having intuition about what was credible, what was not credible, what made me suspicious, and 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 that kind of intuition comes from different places. I'm not quite sure where it
Mhm.
comes from. Maybe it's because I wasn't an economist starting off or something like that, and I brought different kinds of insights or smell tests or whatever to certain kind of outcomes or results, or my own experience in the world.
Mm,
But that informed a lot of what I thought as credible or suspicious or needs investigation or Cutting deeper. It's funny. I'm reading Walter Isaacson's book on Einstein. Now there's
Yeah,
no
I
one.
have that on the shelf.
You should go to the chapter on special relativity, which is his first breakthrough in 2005,
Yeah.
1905. And what's interesting is that the paper is a revolution on special relativity, and yet there's not that much math. Einstein was a genius at thought experiments and intuition and using those to get the core concepts down. And then he would go and get help or build the math himself. So by the time he gets to general relativity, he's deep into the math. But he's always been known for his intuition and his ability to articulate a thought experiment which would isolate the concept he was trying to show or prove. And you realize, one of the greatest thinkers of all time relied on intuition in a very profound way to guide it. Yeah. So it's really worth, I skip right to chapter special relativity. It's fantastic. You'll love it.
But you're bringing that up because that must really resonate with you.
Yes, I think intuition matters a lot.
Scientific intuition. Yeah.
Yes. And it fuels your energy and your persistence, and you then go searching to kind of like make sense of this intuition, or you go searching to challenge someone else's results. And I spent a lot of time challenging people's results. It's not a great career path, but anyway, it energized me because that doesn't make much sense to me, so let me think about it. How would I kind of go at it, and how would you kind of think about it or test it, et cetera? And so it's all very motivating.
This has been wonderful. I have one last thing. I'm curious, when you think back, you said you're sort of nearing retirement. I'm curious, has there been a lesson that you felt like you had to learn the hard way in this career as an economist? Something that, wasn't really, you just had no idea of it. It wasn't because maybe nobody tried to teach. It just required experience to learn this thing. I'm curious what it is that maybe you, looking back, feel like you sort of learned, the hard way or learned it the long way.
So what's your reaction when you send an article to a journal and you get back a rejection and you feel it's unfair? And I read the referee reports and I'm just like, I'm so angry and I'm so frustrated, and you want to like whatever. And so what I got much better at was reading it, putting it aside, mulling over it, coming back to it a few days later, reread the criticisms and go, no, that's not quite right. And slowly kind of absorbing what's been said, hearing what's good, understanding what's not good, what's been misperceived, et cetera, et cetera. And then after a week or two, it gives me the energy to say, okay, I can revise this and I think I can address all this stuff. There's a certain kind of process of like that first envelope when you open or the email and you read it and you just want to like, oh, shit, I put so much work into this and here it is. And you don't lose it. You don't quit the project. You just let yourself kind of like ease into it, absorb it, think about it, and then come back at it. And I think it's that learning to do that really helped me in those 9 points that Shockley raises. And I think persistence being perhaps
it
most
used to be
important
pretty you used to be kind of demoralized by those referee reports.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And you? No?
I got so used to getting rejections that I had to start hacking it in a different way. Yeah, no, I mean, I probably should care more about the rejections than I do. I mean, I think I love the process so much. I just love the process of discovery, but I hate publishing. I hate the refereeing, the visions. Yes. It's just like, but because for me, by the time so in that Shockley thing, I think that last stage of the persistence to getting through, if I ever wrote alone. I have an resubmitted R&R, and it was a solo paper. And I just am like, they told me to take something out. And then I was like, well, then I don't like the paper anymore. And then
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like,
Yeah.
but that's the thing is it's always easy to justify every single part of that production function. It's always going to seem reasonable to justify why you're not doing one of those things because
Yes.
you're voluntarily not doing it. So it must seem like it's pretty sensible to not work on it, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's interesting because I don't know, it's helpful. Like, so yeah, I think that I I like working on teams
Yeah.
because if it's on a team, then there can be others that crack the whip to get it done, and I'll do it, you know. But like
But wait,
I
wait,
get
wait, wait, wait.
so
Let me
frustrated.
stop you. How did you do your book then? That
Oh
book
yeah,
took
that one is
a
different.
lot of effort by Scott alone. Come on.
Well, that was different. That was no, that's true. But that's the thing. The book doesn't go through peer review, so you know all the messiness of it um is like I don't know, like they you know you submit it and they edit out stuff, but it's not like the squeezing of the vice grip that happens with the publishing in an article.
Okay.
I mean, I love it. It's perfect for me. The book, having the books and having the articles, having a little bit of both, I think is the sweet spot for me because I really enjoy the creative part of both of them. You know, they're
Great.
very, very different. And the creative part of the writing of a book is a big deal, and the creative part of the discovery and the work and the coming up with the ideas is another part of the article. But they're very, very different. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
I I don't I worry, you know, people have approached me about writing a book together. They're like great ideas, and all I can think is, I bet I'd be a horrible co-author. I bet it would be like because when it comes to writing, like when it comes to self-expression, I practice those sentences all the time. Like
Hmm.
all the time. I am constantly practicing, you know, is this going to be the right hook to help them? Like if I do it this way. And so, you know, so I can be so opinionated. It might not be something that people realize, but I don't if I you know, if I see another person the way that they explained IV and I am really, really impressed, I definitely, you know, remember that. But a lot of the times, I oftentimes think that, I mean, it's kind of arrogant, but I oftentimes think, no, the way I do it is the best way to do it. That's the way to do it. I know who my audience is, and I know I got to hit it like this. And that's like not that's not conducive to working with things. But on articles, the teamwork, I love it. When it's a good co-authorship relationship, I really like. So Manisha
Yeah.
Shaw that
Yeah.
wrote
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
it was just so wonderful. You know, just like
It's great.
that, like that big discovery. Yeah. So yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess I did have a solo thing, but
Yeah.
that one is I have to like really ride myself to get the revisions done on it because nobody else is riding me.
Right. 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 Well,
Well, it's really good seeing you.
you too. And thank you for inviting me. And it's been
Yeah.
a pleasure. And it's a great way to kind of reconnect. So hopefully I see you around in person someplace. Okay.
Yeah. I hope so. I hope so. All right,
And
I'll
thank
talk
you.
to you.
All right. You take care.
She hated when I called.